like to call this special board meeting to order at 7:05. We'll have a roll call, please.
Ms. Garrison?
Here.
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Ms. Chow?
Here.
Ms. Cartha? Here. Ms. Bailey?
Here.
Mr. Rickus?
Yes.
Ms. Quattrocki?
Here. Our first action is the approval of the agenda. Omar?
I move that the Board of Education approve the March 2nd, 2015 special board meeting agenda as presented.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Chow?
Yes.
Ms. Cartha? Yes. Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Rickus?
Yes.
Ms. Quattrocki?
Yes. Our personnel approval, Candace?
I move that the Board of Education approve the recommended personnel changes.
Second.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Chow?
Yes.
Ms. Cartha? Yes. Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Rickus?
Yes.
And Ms. Quattrocki?
Yes. Motion passes 7-0. I will have the approval of the resolution for a bond sale. Suni?
I move that the Board of Education adopt a resolution providing for the issue of $4,998,462.20 aggregate original principal amount general obligation limited tax school capital appreciation bonds, Series 2015 of Community Consolidated School District Number 65, Cook County, Illinois, and for the levy of a direct annual tax to pay the principal of and interest on said bonds as sold through negotiation with Blaylock Beal Van LLC, as recommended by the school district's financial advisor, Spear Financial Incorporated.
Second.
Second.
And Mary, would you like to give us some introduction?
Approving the resolution to accept this bond sale and issuance will allow the district to proceed with capital projects that the board will be approving in the future. We'll have an updated list at the March 9th Finance Committee meeting, hopefully going to the board on March 23rd for a vote.
Great. Any questions?
I do.
Katie?
Yeah. And I apologize, I wasn't at the last finance meeting, so I know that we'll be able to talk about it at the next finance meeting. But Mary, can you just tell me, once we issue this, how much of the debt service extension base is left?
About $3 million. Right now, we have about $8 million available.
And I just want, my concern is that next year we're going to be doing life safety work, right? We're going to have to do a life safety study, right? Next year, 2015.
It's due by the summer of 16.
So a year from the summer. And how much does it usually cost to do the life safety study?
About around $200,000.
Will that life safety study be paid for from this bond or part of our operating expenses?
That depends to be voted upon. It could be, we are working on revising the list of expenditures down from what was previously brought to the board finance committee in February. And the life safety survey is not due until summer 16, so that may be a project that is delayed a year.
But we have to do it in summer 16, so we have to do it next summer. But you mean delayed, not being done?
It wouldn't need to occur this summer, in other words.
Yeah.
Now, we do expect to have additional proceeds from this bond sale. We do not expect to be bringing a list of, we're looking at reducing the request.
Oh, you are looking?
So the cash on hand, which we expect to have from this sale, will be available to put toward future projects to be approved by the board in the future, which could include the life safety survey or other capital work.
Okay, so we'll be approving the projects. I know the value or the amount of the projects in the packet was about this amount, but you're looking to revise that downward.
Yes.
So I just want to, remind us that, and you know this, Mary, I mean, all of a sudden you might have a roof that needs fixing. I mean, there's so many things that come, and we've had this discussion over the years of how much we should keep in our debt service extension base. I always thought it was good to keep about $8 to $10 million, just that kind of balance, both because something may come up, and also just really because of that. So this will bring it down, and it concerns me because there may be things that we can't plan for.
Now, keep in mind, the district does have access to an additional $2.5 million around that amount each additional year. So,
but we're spending more each year than that 2.5. So that's what worries me. Do you know what I mean? What
Yes.
comes, if we were spending less than that 2.5 each year, then I would feel better in essence, right? Because you'd be maintaining a base. So I mean, I will vote for this because I think we need to at least go ahead with issuing it. But I hope we can have a discussion about bringing down the actual expenditures and see what is really basically needed this year, and what can be put off as we think about other needs that may come up.
And we're also working on an 8-year timeline of capital projects, including possible technology, as to what that might look like going out 8 years, and, you know, showing how it would weave through the debt service. So we're working on that. That should be in the March 9th finance packet for the board finance committee. So we'll show some modeling.
Yeah, I mean, it's just right now there's way more capital needs than there is money.
Clearly there are. Yes, there are.
Which brings up and begs the question of how are we going to fund it? Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, and we will take this up again on March 9th, so this is just the issuing of the debt. Roll call, please.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Chow?
Yes.
Ms. Cartha?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Rickes?
Yes.
Ms. Quattrocki?
Yes, the motion passes 7-0. We now are, the public is invited to share comments on each of the agenda items prior to the board's discussion. That being said, are there any comments regarding the school calendar? Yes. Oh.
Hi, I'm Paula Zielinski. I am president of the District 65 Educators Council. I'm one of the 2 teachers on, I have 1 or more calendar committees. I wanted to first of all talk about the memo that has the 2 teachers who oppose the taking of Pulaski Day. First of all, it has nothing to do with my last name. I did want to say that I think that, you know, the teachers just want to make sure that these are days where there is high student attendance, high teacher attendance. So when we're looking at taking days, that's our primary focus, and I know we've expressed that in the calendar committee, but I wanted to make sure I express it to you as well. Just going forward, DEC's greatest concern with developing the school calendar is that we are looking at days of high student attendance, high staff attendance, and days that provide, you know, optimal learning and working conditions for everybody. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Beatrice.
So the memo that was in the board packet was to give a little bit of an overview of where we are with the school calendar. District 65 and District 202 are working collaboratively to try and draft school calendars for both the 15-16 and 16-17 school year. The goal is really to make every effort possible to align our start dates, end dates, our key holidays, and vacations. Just to give a little background, there are 2 committees. There's a District 65-202 joint calendar committee, and then each district has its own subcommittee with a representative from the other district. So for our sub-calendar committee, we do have 2 parents, we have 2 teachers, we have 2 principals, 2 administrators, 1 central office staff, and myself. And we feel as though the 15-16 calendar, we've discussed it. The one change that the committee is going to suggest when you see the draft calendar in April is that we will take Pulaski Day as a day of instruction. Pulaski Day has been listed as a possible snow emergency day is in our past calendars most recently, and we have decided to include it as one of our 176 days of instruction for the 15-16 school year. And as noted just a few moments ago, there were 2 members of the committee that did not support the recommendation, but the committee felt we were going to bring it forward with that change. What we're looking at now is the 16-17 draft calendar and some challenges that we face with this. We do want to make this a more inclusive process, and the committee's discussed ways to do that in trying to survey perhaps parents as well as staff. And when I say staff collectively, we do want to make sure that any changes we're proposing that are going to be very different, that we have as much information to make those decisions as possible. With regards to student attendance, we will try and get some historical data on student attendance on specific days. For instance, an example I can give you is that for 16-17, the winter recess, and when the holidays were falling, and if we were to have instruction on that last day, which is a Friday, typically if we have instruction on those days, what does attendance look like? So we do want to make sure that we're using information and data to drive our decisions. So as of right now, the recommendation is for the board to approve the draft for 15-16 when it's presented in April. And we are asking for some additional time so that we can conduct these surveys, get the information, and use it. And so rather than bringing the 16-17 draft calendar in April, we would like to bring that in May of 2015, which is just a little bit later, but in doing so, it would allow us enough time to try and conduct some surveys and get some information, and also work with the high school in order to make sure we are bringing forth a calendar that makes sense for the 16-17 school year.
And if I can add, I want to thank all who are participating in our committee. A couple things that Beatrice said that is actually really important. One is coordination with the high school to the best that we can in terms of broad issues of when the start dates might be, when holidays are, et cetera. So I think that's one of the pieces that we're looking at for 16-17. I think a second piece is, given the snow emergencies and the cold emergencies that we've had this year, we want to make sure that we can designate in the calendar the appropriate days for instruction that we can make up, so that we can make those days up and try not to stretch as deep into June as we perhaps may have to do this year. So that's a deep concern. And then a third piece, which is driven a bit by the next presentation on the strategic plan, we got a lot of fantastic ideas around professional learning and professional development. And so we want to make sure that we have the time set aside for our teachers, our teacher leaders, our other staff members who are participating in professional learning, to maximize that time so that we can be the learning community we wish to be. That will have some ramifications on the calendar, whether we stick with the professional development days that we have now or come up with a creative new scheme. And so we're spending some time thinking about that as well.
Questions? Katie?
Yeah, thank you, Phaedra, for doing this. I have a couple questions. When you just said that thing about the professional development days, would you change them for next year, or are you mean 2016, 2017?
2016, yeah. Next year, we are basically sticking with the calendar as you did a preliminary approval,
Okay.
which would have the Wednesdays.
The Wednesday, okay,
Yeah.
so you're not going to, I didn't know, it seemed rushed to make the change for next year, but I appreciate that you're going to be looking at it in the future.
Correct, and that's why we didn't
Okay.
want to go forward.
And then I have a question, because one of the things I thought Barb did such a great job, the legacy of Pulaski Day, was making Pulaski Day a snow emergency day. And so, but you just said, because I thought that was a nice way of, if you had a snow emergency, it could be which we did, it could be a school day. But now, if we give it up, you said you're still going to try to find snow emergency days within the calendar, but how do you find them then? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I have the same question.
Oh, okay.
One of the things the committee really just started to talk about, and certainly hasn't been finalized, but to talk about for the 16-17 calendar, is the possibility of having President's Day be designated as an emergency day. So that's one of the ones that we're looking at.
But for next year, that wouldn't be for next year.
For next year, the only change we recommended was to have Pulaski Day as a day of instruction. We did not make any other changes. We kept the early release Wednesdays and the rest of the draft as it was.
I'd just like to hear a little bit more about that rationale, though, to do that, because I'm not understanding what we get by doing that. Pulaski Day, making it an instruction day and not having it as a possible snow emergency day. It seemed to work, like Katie said, it seemed to work so well last year. So what do we gain?
I think one of the things we talked about a lot as a committee is where are our days of instruction happening, and once you start pushing, we think, further into June, is the instruction at the same level? And not because the teachers aren't committed, but because you're winding down your curriculum. You're not going to be presenting anything new. Pulaski Day falls in March. There's still a lot of instruction happening. And would it make more sense to add it as a day of, so we have 176 days, including it there, as opposed to possibly, you know, taking it, it's something, it is a change, but it's a change that people would have enough time to adjust to.
And as a designated day of instruction, indeed today is Pulaski Day, and so we had a day of instruction. There were, I'm certain that there were some families who, and perhaps some educators who had plans already, and so by having the designated day of instruction, that gives us the opportunity to move forward and to plan against the potential for snow and cold emergency.
I would, oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I jumped ahead of you. No, I support having Pulaski Day as a day of instruction, especially putting it on the calendar now for next year. I think it gives people ample time to plan, to be here that day. I don't really support the idea of having other days, like President's Day, for example, as maybe days. Just because I think people do look at the calendar and they do plan to, teachers and students alike plan to be out if there's in that case, it would be a 4-day weekend.
Right.
So then adding it back in, maybe only a few weeks in advance, depending on where the snow day falls, I think you're gonna, if we're talking about trying not to have high days where there's absences, I don't think we're going to accomplish that by having I would support having President's Day just be an instructional day if we want to go down that route. But I'm not I appreciate the reasoning, but I think that we should find other maybe creative ways of increasing.
Just a point of 2 points of clarification. One, the maybe days are usually that second week of June, and that's designated in the calendar, but that actually pushes the envelope for many families and for our educators who've worked a long, hard year. So that's one piece. And then the second piece is that the half-day Wednesdays are actually considered full instructional days by the way the state of Illinois considers it. So I got a lot of important and well-received feedback on the canceling of school and then the suggestion of trading off one of the Wednesdays, but that's already a full instructional day. So just wanted to clarify that.
No, and I understand that. I guess I'm just saying, like, taking I feel like it's going to cause more problems to put in, like, President's Day as a holiday, but then take it away, especially in the case of if it's January when we're having the snow days, and to say, you know, less than a month later, the day that you thought was going to be a day off is not going to be a day off, I think will create more chaos, as opposed to having that being in June at the end of the year, when we have the emergency days built in.
Thanks, Candace.
Can I just have it's kind of clarifying question information. So because you say in here that we are aligned for 15-16 with the high school, with the exception of the parent-teacher conferences, does that mean that both Pulaski Day and Columbus Day, both schools are going to be non-attendance days? Because previously
They will be
I'm sorry, going to be
attendance
attendance days rather for both?
days, yes.
Okay.
Yes, and they actually do reserve President's Day as a possible day of instruction. I don't think they took it this year because just because of the timing of things, to your point. But for next year, for 15-16, the calendars are aligned.
So I just want to say a note of thanks on behalf of parents everywhere for that alignment, because it may not seem like a lot, but I think that is just those 2 days and having the calendar fully aligned. I know we're going to come up against potentially different issues come 16, 17, but I think that's a huge step forward and something that the community has been asking for some time. So thanks to the committees for working on that together.
I agree. Katie?
Can I finish? So the only thing else I wanted to bring up is 16, 17. And, you know, I appreciate what you said. Last Thursday, we had our joint 65-202 meeting. For those of you who weren't there, Tracy, Candace, and I were, and administrators. But I know we're going to discuss it next week on the 16th. It's on the calendar. And I think that we need to give parameters to our administrators on what we're willing to discuss. I mean, what are we willing to, I think we can't go forward, we need to make a decision. Are we willing to have the school start a different day than the high school? Are we willing to go back another week? Are we willing to open up certain holidays? And I think we need to have that discussion either as our board or both boards. Because if not, the calendar committee could come by with a calendar that does something that we're not going to support. And so I don't know if that will be next week, but I do think we need to give them some parameters. I've heard that loud and clear from the calendar committees.
I think that would be helpful also. I know that there's a concern about when parental input is brought into the equation and whether or not the board sets those parameters before we hear back from either of the surveys. So that is the sequencing we have to think about. When would our survey be done? Because I think 202 has finished theirs.
I didn't get it. It's been
Or
random.
maybe
They said they had done one previously.
previously, I guess.
I
it
think that was
when-
last,
yeah, it was last
the end
year.
of last year.
Will ours be finished by this?
So that is certainly our intention. When the committee met last week, we left kind of with a charge of parents trying to come up with some questions they thought would be helpful for parents, teachers doing the same for teachers and administrators, and at our next meeting, which is in just a few weeks, coming together in order to make a decision on what those survey questions will be and then how the survey will be presented. And so our hopes would be to get that information back as quickly as possible so that we can use it in order to make the decisions so that we can present a calendar to you, a draft calendar in May. So we are trying to work quickly on it.
Any other thoughts?
I just want to emphasize what Candace said because that was an issue I'd raised for 2 or 3 years, which is alignment of the two calendars. So I'm really glad that at least the proposal for 1 year is going to have that alignment occur. I think it would be a good idea if we gave parameters, and to me that would be one that I would put at the top of the list, which is alignment, unless there is like some driving reason that it can't occur, like it really can't occur. And I think the issue that we talked about before was there are a lot of families where the older children take care of the younger children. And so when we have a day off that they don't, it creates problems for a lot of families. You know, it can be financial burden for some families, it can be just logistics. And I think we need to be really sensitive to that.
Do you all feel like we could have that parameter discussion at the joint meeting? Because I can broach that with our counterparts. If you all feel that it's a decision that we would feel comfortable with, even just as basic as the start date, whether or not we would align that absolutely, or whether we'd entertain 2 separate start dates. Is that a conversation you're ready to have, or
I think that
wanting to have?
I do have the same concern that I've voiced at the joint subcommittee meeting, which is putting a stake in the ground like that, absent some community input for me personally, because I've not been on the board for the same tenure as some of you, and I don't have both the high school and 65 joint experience. I would feel less informed than I would like to make such a statement and to be able to support it with fervor. So that is my concern. To say, yes, I believe in alignment, but at what cost, to the point of, at what cost is where today it breaks down a little bit for me, because I don't know all the consequences of when, because if we have very real issues of air conditioning and other, things that are very real and costly issues to the district that might preclude that from happening, and weigh that against the need from the community. I would just like to have a real idea of how strong that need, and even some basic data on what percentage of our families actually cross both districts. I don't know that. I'm assuming it's a fair amount, but I think we all should know as a starting point, what percentage of our families typically does this affect, and that we have, they have students in both districts.
I think it's fine if we don't have the discussion, although I don't know which John or who said it. I think what we really need to see outlined are kind of what the major issues are and what the pros and cons are.
Yeah.
Because although I agree alignment is key, I don't know whether this district would agree to go back to the second week in August if that were the case. I mean, so I think what we really, and I'm not saying that's what they're thinking of doing, and I'm not saying I would be against that, but I think we really need to understand the pros and cons. And so I think that's what I really want to see from them. What are the kind of the sticking points and what are those issues to 202, which is it is a different district. The high school has different issues and different, and then what are the pros and cons, or the, I don't know if pros and cons is the right word, but you know, kind of the pluses and minuses to these major issues.
Yep.
And then I actually think it would be good to know that number of, if it exists, of what percentage of families we're talking about. So, because then alignment may not be possible every year. The only other thing I think I'll throw out is how many years is the issue of start date an issue? I mean, if they're willing to go to the fourth, and John, I think we talked about this, if they're willing to go to the fourth Monday, and it's, you know, once every 3 years that we're not going to be aligned, that's different. But if they're going to be going to this, you know, to moving up so exams are before Christmas, then if we can't do that, or can we do that, how often would the non-alignment be?
Flavia.
Just a couple of things. One is if the high school is fully air conditioned, right? And I think, having worked in one of our non-air conditioned schools, the farther back you go, and if you get into the, it's not productive days of instruction frequently when everybody is so hot. So if you had 2 more weeks of instruction when it was August and really not enjoyable. I mean, it's something we really have to reckon with. I think it's not something to say, oh, well, because it's not an oh, well thing. It really is unpleasant.
You know, we actually were presented by some members of PTAs with a temperature analysis. And it showed it was very little difference when you looked at the end of June or pushing it earlier in August. It was, I don't remember exactly, but it was like a degree or 2 degrees. I mean, it was not, it wasn't like it was 5 or 7 or 8. There was a pretty in-depth, multi-year analysis of the temperature. So I feel like I've seen that, but it might be useful
It would be useful
for others to see that again.
Well, it might be, I guess, all I have here is anecdotal evidence of stifling classrooms.
I get that.
What percentage of our classrooms are not
But we had real data.
The classrooms are all air conditioned. We have 4 standing units in some and window units in others. We don't have central air in every building, that's for sure. But the classroom areas are air conditioned.
And what about the gym and?
The gymnasiums and
cafeteria.
the cafeterias are not all air conditioned, correct.
And then the other thing is, I just like a little bit better understanding of the fact that the 2 teacher representatives, I don't know if Paula can clarify or if you can clarify, but why they weren't in favor of it, since it's pointed out and noted.
Well, it is pointed out and noted, and I will say they wanted it to be noted. I don't want to feel like I'm trying to diminish their role or do anything negative in that, but I believe to what Paula said before is they did not feel, and Paula, correct me if I'm wrong, they didn't think there would be a high attendance, high student attendance on Pulaski Day.
Because?
I think because people are used to having it off, and please clarify if that's not why, but that's what I was hearing during the meeting.
Could we ask Paula to?
And sure, and what I was saying is, you know, change is hard, but if you give people enough notification up front, they can take the time to adjust their schedules accordingly. And so the rest of the committee did feel that taking Pulaski Day as a day of instruction for 15-16 would be a good idea moving forward. But certainly,
Sure.
Sure.
So, Pulaski Day, that was just sort of brought up to us at the last meeting. I think our concern comes from Columbus Day. We know that in the past, when there was a calendar committee, we looked at Mondays, both before Columbus Day and after Columbus Day, to sort of examine student attendance on and what impact having school on Columbus Day had. And it was lower. Now, whether that's still lower, that's one of the things we talked about is can we go back and look at the data for Columbus Day? But again, we're looking for high attendance days. So we want days when kids are in school. Can I just say something about the heat? I can't explain. I mean, I know I've come before the board before and talked about how absolutely miserable it is in August. You know, the buildings are brick. Brick holds in that heat. It's been holding it in, throughout the summer. It's humid. The smell is awful. We have buildings that have room air conditioners, and yet, for example, at Dewey, it doesn't really make a difference. When you go into some of the classrooms at Dewey, they're still roasting. When you're on the 3rd floor in some of the middle schools and you're facing to the west, it's really awful. So you might show something on the temperature, but there's the real feel, and what it really feels like in August is different than what it feels like in June. So, thanks.
Thank you, Paula.
It does help.
That's it.
Are you finished?
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments? So Beatrice, what would we expect at the board meeting, the joint board meeting? Would we be talking about some of the pros and cons of this start date, or would we just be laying out?
Our next calendar, let's see. So there's a joint 202-65 calendar meeting on this coming Thursday, and then I believe our 65 committee meeting is on the 17th, which is actually a day after the joint meeting. What I guess what we could do is, based on the meeting this Thursday, we can present some of the challenges we see so far and have conversations about that. And then if at that meeting you do decide to try and set some parameters, we can take those and I can bring them to the meeting, our next committee meeting the next day, and we can start our work based on that.
Although it sounds like this board isn't comfortable doing that without some input or more information that might take more time to gather, such as crossover between the districts and other things. So we may just lay out the process, and maybe if you could outline some of the upcoming challenges and what we would be prepared to see at what point.
I think that's a good solution, which is the process of where we're going to go, how we'll find some input from our internal community and our external community, and then what some of the potential choices are, without saying these are the choices. But it's a constrained equation here. We can start the second Monday of August. I'm not saying we will, the 3rd or the 4th. Or if there's the 5th, and we have to run the pros and cons of those vis-a-vis how the high school is actually thinking about all those as well.
Has the high school already proposed, or when do they propose their draft 16-17 calendar? Do they already have that draft?
No, I think they're still working on their 16-17 calendar as well. That's what we're discussing at our meeting this Thursday.
Oh, this Thursday, okay.
Well,
Although it
technically,
sounded
haven't
like
they have
we've
several
approved the
grants.
draft, haven't we?
For
And it's
15,
budgeted.
16, not for
16,
16, 17, have we?
But it
Oh, we
sounded
did?
to me as though they were trying to finalize something this spring. Didn't it sound like that?
So for 15-16, we both feel for their districts, our calendars
Yeah.
are finished. We're both working on 16-17. We have our joint meeting on Thursday, which will give us an opportunity to see where we are with our drafts and what the challenges are. I have a feeling that the start date will be the topic of conversation. But my understanding is they are bringing that calendar to their board in the spring as well. So I'm not sure if it's in maybe April.
Well, then I take that back. I think we should have a conversation. If they're going to bring a finalized 16-17 to their board, see, this is what's happened in the past. There's been who's going to approve theirs first, and then who comes. So we really do, as a board, two boards should talk about it. If the questions or the considerations are outlined in this meeting next week, then we would have we could have a discussion about that, because we don't have another meeting if they're going to finalize.
I actually think you probably could with 16, 17. If they come and say they're going to have it, I think 16, 17, the big issue, if it's the 4th or the 5th Monday.
Right, exactly.
And I think we could have that discussion about whether for that year we go ahead with it. But I think then it's the more complicated issue of if they're moving it back, are we willing to, and what those pros and cons are. The only thing else I wonder, and Gretchen made it perfectly clear, and I know she is right about this, that by state code we have to pass 15, 16 at some point this spring, in April, I guess. I don't know what the timing is. I just wondered whether our policy is usually that we have the next 2 to 3 years, I think. Is it 2 years? Up on the major dates, the start and stop dates and holidays. But I don't know if that's our policy or is that just practice? I look at you, but I think we might want to know.
That's still just a draft, though, whatever we have is not final and approved.
It's approved start and stops, and it can change, but it's a draft so that people can plan. But I don't know what our policy is if we have anyone, because it may be late May it may be a while till that agreement comes along, unless it's only the start date and we say, okay, we'll go to the 4th Monday, and then it's a non-issue.
Okay.
I guess the one thing I would still ask, just because our committee wants the opportunity to gather the information that you're asking for, is maybe there's a conversation with 202 so that we can present the draft in May as opposed to April, because we're going to end up at crunch time. And if we really want to solicit information, we want to make sure that we're using it, not just soliciting it. And to give the committee enough time to work on it, I would ask that we can bring the draft in May as opposed to April, just for the 16, 17.
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
I love that.
Great. All right. So that sounds like a good plan for the next meeting. Are there any, so we're off calendar, we're going to the strategic plan. Are there any comments from the public regarding the draft strategic plan? No? Okay, then Paul will kick us off.
Thank you very much. I decided to take the podium here to present to the board on behalf of staff and the community. And what I'm going to do is spend a little bit of time giving an overview on the plan that you've reviewed in your packet and that we've worked on over the last couple months, and then open up for conversation. And then we'll go into some of the outcome measures that we've proposed as well as part of the full presentation. So it really is a great pleasure for me to stand here tonight and speak on behalf of our educators and our extended staff of District 65, community members, our neighbors, civic leaders who've spent hours, months working on this effort to engage around what we are looking for in the future of District 65. The pieces of the puzzle have come together so nicely, and I couldn't thank the players, including you all, enough for the amount of time and effort, the thousands of hours that we've had in committees, in reviewing, and engaging in the community across the board on this work. And it's just, again, a pleasure for me to be able to present the plan today. I'm going to present the plan today. We'll bring it back for full approval on the 23rd of March in our board meeting then. And as I go, I'm going to do a few things. I'm going to set the context of the plan as it relates to our current data and information regarding student achievement. I'm going to provide a vision for the district and sort of take a little journey with us to what the district might look like, will look like in the year 2020. I'll do the quick overview of the plan, and then we'll talk about next steps, and then pause for your comments and questions, and then we'll move forward. But it behooves me to start by bringing in the data that we presented several weeks ago on achievement in the district, and to set the context there. And when we look at the student achievement data, which really poses challenges, and indeed in our conversation could potentially pose a crisis in terms of how well we're doing and how well we're performing in our schools. The data are sobering, as we presented actually a month ago with, as you can see in front of you, students who are not performing or who are performing at grade level in reading and math. Close to 70% of our students are doing that, but the counter to that is 30% are not. And as we think about college and career readiness, 60%, close to 60% of our children, our students are meeting benchmarks in reading and mathematics, but 40% are not. And we want to pay attention to both sides. We want to pay attention to those students who are doing well in the district, and we want to pay attention to those who are struggling. The specifics, as we presented in the Achievement and Accountability Report, are, as I said earlier, sobering. None of the board's goals from 2011 were achieved. The proficiency in reading and math over the last 4 years has actually decreased. The percentage of students making expected nationally normed gains on the MAP test have just decreased dramatically over the last 4 years. And gaps in achievement, by however we disaggregate, by income, by race, by disability status, persist. So it's a clarion call. It's a clarion call for all of us, starting in my office, through the classrooms and into the community, and not only for us as educators and us who work in the system, but for those of us who live in Evanston, to rally behind the schools and the work that we want to do to move forward. And it really is a clarion call also to say, let's build on the foundation that we have. Let's make sure that foundation is strong, and then let's move forward to find progress so that we can make a difference in the lives of kids. The strategic plan, in my mind, responds to this. And it was really grounded in these data as we move forward. And indeed is grounded in a lot of feedback that that was presented to us as we spent the last several months. This plan is built on what I refer to as deep listening. We spent time in schools. We did surveys. We had a broad public comment period. We had town hall meetings. And we really listened, and we listened deeply to the concerns and the issues and the hopes of citizens in Evanston and Skokie. And if I may, this is the only piece I'll read. I want to read, this is in the opening of the plan. And it says, "We listened as a mother dreamed about classrooms where children are challenged to develop their critical thinking, creativity, and abilities to communicate and collaborate. We heard a grandfather envision a future where schools value each student and every aspect of his or her identity. We listened as a neighbor told us about the passion for mentoring and the need for caring adults in the lives of every child. We heard educators tell us about their joy in helping young people develop a love for learning and their own passion as educators for developing the craft of teaching. We heard community members speak about the power of the arts and of the importance of social and emotional learning. We listened to family members express their hope that if their children perhaps get knocked down in any way, that they would have the resilience to get back up." And that sort of commentary was loud and clear in the school visits that I did throughout the time period, in the town hall meetings, in the engagement that we had in our committee groups as well, with the External Advisory Committee as well. So go on a journey with me and imagine that we're standing here. It's May of 2020. I guess Vision 2020 is overused, but it's probably worth thinking about what the district will look like in 5 years, really based on what the district looks like now. And so if we think about that, and if I'm on this journey, when I walk into a school, I'm going to be greeted by friendly front office staff like I am already, but who have had training on inclusive practices as part of a family and community engagement strategy. I'm going to notice the plaque in the school that really celebrates the award that the one school won for innovation and excellence in the use of educational technology. I'm going to be happy and pleased, as we talked earlier, but I'm going to be happy and pleased that we've navigated choppy financial waters and that we have adequate resources to run our system, and that indeed, as we talked earlier, that we have the support and the resources to upgrade our schools as appropriate for the children and the families that we serve. When I walk through the hallway, I'm going to see a poster that invites parents to an event where they will participate in their own decision-making process of services they want to see available in the school, either after school or on weekends. I'm going to step into a conference room and see a meeting of the school's climate team, a team that faculty have worked together to develop what the best structure is for them, where they will be problem solving around students' physical, emotional, cognitive needs. I'll see that this team is also supported by what we propose in the plan, which is a whole child council that will be providing data and information on children's broad needs and on services that might be available in the community, and how the interaction between this whole child council will work with the team that's in the school. I'll see a calendar in the conference store that announces the professional learning community that exists in the school, and how teachers are working together to make decisions about instruction. I'll stop in a classroom where 3 third-grade teachers are planning lessons together, and they'll have a copy of the instructional framework and the curriculum maps in front of them. And I'll stop by a first-grade class, and I'll see a teacher who has had 4 years of experience working somewhere else, but has actually chosen to work here. After, of course, she has graduated at the top of her class at Howard University in Washington, D.C., and we will have hired her in April, if not earlier. When I talk to a parent, I'll hear that the decision-making around the district budget and our finances is clearer. They'll tell me about the focus and how they really are engaged with the combination of academic and social and emotional skills that we're teaching. They'll tell me how culturally relevant teaching has improved their children's experience. They'll especially appreciate our emphasis on executive functioning and combining that with a mindset of a young person that I can achieve, that I can actually be an excellent student. And they'll like the new report card and the quality of the parent and teacher conferences. And then when I get back to my office, I'll find out that we've just finished a report from our Research and Accountability Department where it shows the increase in students' college readiness levels, fewer students in the bottom quartile, and satisfaction data from staff indicating just how great it is to work in District 65. The vision for 2020, and then the question is, how do we get from here to there? As you know, we've used the framework that we've sort of put into a nice cozy home here, nested at the foundation of financial sustainability, building out a thriving workforce, and having focused attention to high-quality teaching and learning, family and community involvement, and a safe and supportive school climate. And in each of these, each of this work, each of these buckets of work, we've actually convened committee members from inside the district and throughout the community to help us drive forward what's in the strategic plan. In the copy of the plan that you have today, we've made some changes from the first draft that we showed you. We've refined the definition of professional learning communities. We've actually talked about, as I mentioned in my journey, implementing an instructional framework for all learners. We've talked in a very focused way about the constant implementation of instructional approaches for struggling learners, students who are in the bottom 25% of performance, our English language learners, students with disabilities. We've talked about the improvement of formative assessment and evidence-based feedback. As I mentioned, the executive functioning skills coupled with an idea about mindsets and about how we really are powerful learners, and in powerful learners that we have to also, if I'm a powerful learner and I believe in myself, I also have to be organized to actually do the work that needs to be done. And we've also introduced in the high quality teaching and learning section what we are calling an innovation work group. And this is an internal team of teacher leaders and administrators, and I'm going to sit at the table on this, where we will be looking at innovation that's going on in the district, whether it's in instruction, in the supports for children, in the use of technology, and trying to figure out how we best can spread those innovations throughout the district, while at the same time paying attention to innovations that are out in the field that we work in. We've talked for several months about a thriving workforce and being very focused on fostering collaboration, creativity, and an inclusive workplace that attracts and develops high quality and the best talent. And really, in many ways, this conversation was about attracting the best talent and having the best environment to work in for teachers and for support staffs and for the staffs who maintain our buildings and help children every day. In this section of the plan, from what you've seen in the past, we have a very much more focused and intentional strategy around professional learning. And this actually is a piece of the entire strategic plan, where we know that the professional learning that needs to occur to be able to make the changes that we need to make so that we can have the achievement that we want to have is really quite important. We know that recruitment has to be intentional, it has to be timely, and we have to focus on retention, and we've been focused on that. As I mentioned, we want to create and build upon the culture that we have of District 65 so that we can actually move forward into the future with the celebration that this is a fabulous place to work. And we want to be intentional on the potential pathways for all staff members, be they teachers, administrators, support staff, folks who work on our business side of our operation, where we really look to growth and opportunities. We have a section of the plan that focuses on family and community engagement. And again, focusing on intentional and meaningful partnerships with all families and community members. We want to make sure that we expand the engagement opportunities and make sure that we pay attention to how we engage families. And for those families who might be disengaged, that we intentionally reach out and work our best to welcome them into the system. We've talked very explicitly, and even more so than what you've seen in the past, about specific community partnerships, specifically with Northwestern University, with District 202 and the collaboration that we've already started in our work around Cradle to Career, and then again with this idea of having an intentional focus on the whole child, having a council inside the district that actually is looking at data on children and how they're faring and what the root causes of some of their concerns might be, and what and what we can do to actually help them. There's a feedback loop that would exist between the partnerships that we would have, for instance, with Cradle to Career and this internal Whole Child Council. We've said that we very much want to embrace everything that we can learn about the community schools partnership at Shoot, both the multiple sides of that partnership that are really quite exciting, the engagement of families and the empowerment of families to actually make decisions on their own around what's necessary for the support for their children inside the schoolhouse and also in the community, and the importance of having wraparound services that can actually support our families. And then a real emphasis on building capacity for family and community engagement, and that includes a focus on diversity, the diverse needs of all of our families, and inclusion. And we want to make sure that we're intentional about that. We have a section of the plan that talks about safe and supported school climate, where all members of the school community feel emotionally and physically safe, included, and accepted. And it's in this section that we talk about the importance of both academic skills and growth and social and emotional learning. And that work has to be done in the regular routine of the classroom, so that, again, we can walk into places called second grade or called sixth grade, and we can see work that actually crosses over academic and social emotional learning, while we also have specified programs like Responsive Classroom or the technique of morning meeting or other social emotional learning that's necessary. As I've said before, we have a real focus on the whole child, paying attention to the context that the kids bring, from where the kids come and the family situations that they're in, and really being as intentional as we can on what we can do within our own warrant of running a school system and educating children to support those needs inside the schoolhouse, and then to intentionally figure out how to work with our community partners externally. And embedded in all of this is this teaming of having data teams at the schools who are understanding who the children are in the school, and actually then working both with the whole school council and other players to actually make a difference in how we provide programming. And last but not least, and indeed in in the graphic, this is at the foundation, the financial sustainability of the district is of utmost importance. To have clarity around our budget, understanding where our resources are coming from and how we deploy them, that our budgets are made on, based on priorities driven by this plan, and there are much more specifics in the plan, that we pay attention to the capital needs of the district, and that we have an infrastructure and methods to be able to support the improvement of our capital needs, and that we pay attention to the operating revenue of the district as well. And given the constraints, how do we approach operations? There's uncertainties before us, just as I started with concerns about student performance, or uncertainties about our finances, which are both specific to District 65 and then something that we all share across the state of Illinois. And we have to be on our toes and be able to communicate as clearly as we can to the public, to be able to move forward in a way that will provide the educational services that we see as very important. So the details are in the plan, and we've discussed them many, many times, and I'm more than willing to walk through any of the questions or concerns that you might have. What you have is a long-term vision, and the document that you have that's embedded in your board packages is the long version. We will be producing a shorter version that will highlight the directions we're going in and what the specific details are, and we'll have continued engagement of this process with members of our staff, our broad staff, and our community members. So what does all this mean? What comes next? I want to make sure that I emphasize the first 2 points here. We can do this. We can do this. The enthusiasms, the excitement that I've encountered over the last several months since I've landed here tells me that we can do this. And our data also, though, tell us that we have to be aggressive, that we have to move with dispatch, that we have to be intentional, that we have to pay attention to the professional learning needs of all of our staff members, and that we have to engage with our community partners in ways that are really important. That said, if we're students at all of strategic planning, we know that the devil is in the detail, and that strategies have to be implemented well, and that we also need time to implement. And that indeed, where strategic plans at times stumble along is when there isn't enough time and proper attention to the implementation process. So our next stage is to unpack at the staff level and engage with you very detailed implementation plans. And that then says to me that we should be focused on what we will be doing over the proposed 5 years of this plan, but that we should actually reflect on that in an annual way, as we will talk about in our outcomes. So my recommendation is that this is indeed a proposed 5-year plan with annual updates, where we would prepare presentations for you with scorecards and a deep dive into where we are and what we're doing. And that at the 3-year point, that we would also have a time to really take a look at where we are, where we're going, and take a deep examination of whether or not we should change course in any which way to meet the needs that are emerging in the community. So I'm presenting a 5-year plan. At year 3, we will do a deep dive and present back to the board and to the public where we are and where we believe there should be a course change. And indeed, on an annual basis, we'll do that as well. We want this to be an organic and living document that drives the work that we do in the district, that's a guidepost for us as we move forward. We want to learn from this process, and we want to make sure that we can go forward in a way that will make a difference. March 23rd, we will bring back the final for your approval. We will be spending time in April. I will be spending time in April across the community and in our schools, really talking about next steps on the plan. And then in August, as part of our review process, we will offer the first annual report on the plan and where we are and where we're going and how we're moving forward. I'm going to pause in a moment, but I'd be remiss if I didn't offer a wide range of thank yous. starting with the educators and the colleagues throughout the system, all of the staff who really deeply engaged in this process as our commitment to moving the district forward, to community members who've done the exact same thing. Families, community members, civic leaders have been fabulous. To the senior staff who are sitting here and other colleagues, we have really put our heart and soul into this. And to you as individual and collective board members, and if I may, I'd like to thank Candace for her help and her feedback and her support over the time representing all of you. This is only the beginning, though. This is not, here's a plan, see you later, bye. This is, we have a plan. We feel very confident that we can do this well. We feel very positive that through the help that you've provided and through the help that we have elicited throughout the community, that we can truly make a difference in the lives of children every day, each child and every day. So with that, I'm going to pause and hear your questions and concerns, and then we'll segue into a conversation about some of the outcome measures as well.
Great. I'll start on behalf of the board with our thank yous, and Candace, you can chime in. First to the community, and I have to say, when you all laid out that plan and said people are going to join committees, come to town hall meetings, fill out surveys, and email back on mission statements, I was a little skeptical. But the community really came through, and it makes me feel so much more comfortable as a board affirming a vision that we know is rooted in the vision of the community. So that's a great feeling. And then to you all, watching this document evolve, it's been fascinating knowing that it has the input of the principals, the teachers, parents, community. And I read it over and over, and then the last time I read it, I came and I said, wow, I really felt inspired. It felt intimate, it felt persuasive, and it had a real vision. And so hats off to you all, you did a wonderful job. Candace, you want to add anything?
Well, I think that's extremely eloquent. I'm not sure that I could add to I think that, the part about this is the product of this as well as the process really has truly inspired me, and it's difficult to express how we have a product that I think really does, it's evidence-based, it's focused on key change levers, it's embedded with accountability, and that all makes for a great plan that can be implemented. And then we have a process that really was imbued with the beliefs and the needs and the aspirations and the values of this community very fully. I don't think it gets any better than that. And so thank you very, very much. And thank you. It's been a privilege to be part of this process and a privilege to be part of this community, quite frankly, and part of this process. So thank you.
Now for the questions.
And the concerns.
Claudia.
The only thing I haven't heard you say, which just thrilled me to the depth of my being when I read over the plan, is that it's useful. It's something, I mean, when you said we can do it, and it's sort of like, yeah, it's not just, I don't know, slogans and aspirations and so much that you can't follow it. It's a useful document, and I can see how it can be enacted, and that's just a wonderful thing. And I just wanted to say that I was glad to see the 5-year time frame change, because that's the one thing I was worried about, is it's an awful lot of things to get done in 3 years, and looking at a 5-year horizon I think is much more realistic. So, good idea.
Yeah. Well, thank you all as well.
It's also really honest, and I'll say I like that. Second, third, what everybody has said. That opening letter, I told Peter and Paul this the other day, that opening letter was inspiring to me because it was so hopeful, and it spoke of community input, but it was also honest about some of the challenges we face. And I think starting at a point of honesty and transparency is really what this is about. And it takes time to change a culture, but I really believe that this plan is going to do that. And I can't thank you enough, Candace, and the board. I mean, what you did in terms of taking our comments and making sure the process and working with the team was clear and transparent, and involved the community. It was amazing, so thank you. And to the team who worked so hard, I'm surprised you guys are standing up right now. And those who aren't here, thank you. And really, I think I'm going to say it to the community. It really is interesting where I sit right now, going off the board. I feel so good about it in the sense that there is such a great plan ahead, and I'm going to be excited to see it come to fruition in the next 3 to 5 years. I appreciate that you've taken the feedback on the timing, because I think one of the things you heard, I think I wrote it down too, that one of the things that everybody told you is to focus and prioritize and don't do too much at one time. And I think this allows you and your team and your staff to really take the time to do it and to do it right. And there's also a lot of exciting things in here. I mean, talking about the whole child, I mean, that's so exciting. And talking about innovation and talking about learning from our best. That's very exciting. So I personally am very excited about this, and I thank you all for what you've done and what you are going to do.
We have to live up to reputation and ask
Yep.
a couple hard questions.
Yeah, why are you turning to me? Big surprise.
we didn't ask
It is really inspirational, and everything you guys have all said, it reflects the community, it's achievable, and if we realize what's in here, there will be a huge impact on the students. It's not really if, it's to what extent, right? Because we know we'll realize some real results. Because Tracy asked me to, I will just raise a couple of things. I certainly wouldn't have done it on my own, right, Tracy?
Right.
So one thing that would be really helpful in seeing all of the milestones as we go to approve it is just understanding how you might group them in terms of sequence. So which ones do you think might be the group that you tackle, first? You don't even have to put a year to it. It doesn't have to be year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but which ones sequentially are you thinking you'll tackle first? Which ones might be second and which third? And I think there's probably some logic to which ones are more foundational that you want in place first before you build off of those. I think that would be interesting and also help the community understand what to expect, because if they see something in there that they think is really important, but we don't tackle it for a couple of years, it's helping to manage their and our expectations that, okay, it's in here, we're going to get to it, just not right away. So not numbering, 1 through 70, all the milestones, but just some really simple high-level groupings, I think would help.
And we will, in the spirit of being honest, we will do the best we can by the end of March to do that. For sure, we'll have that by August when we have the more, part of this is doing the deep dive. We've already done one round of work planning and what does this really mean in our day-to-day and night-to-night and weekend lives. And so by August, we can for sure have that level of detail.
Okay. And then just the second thing, which is a topic that I know I've talked about with different people here, and that is just some of the leading indicators. And I know you're still going to be talking about measures of success. I don't know if I should hold my comments until after we're done talking about that. Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about that,
We're
right?
going to
'Cause I-
talk
Yes.
about, yeah, we
We're
all
gonna
have
move into
some
that in a
input
second.
there, yeah. But this is just,
But thank you. I can't even imagine how much effort has gone into this collectively. I've gone through these types of processes in much simpler organizations than one as complex as a school district. So really impressive.
So I will just add that great job. I think the community involvement was intentional, and I think it was pretty remarkable, but I think it also poses a real challenge for you, because now that becomes the floor, and the expectation going forward is how do you keep reaching out and making sure that you get the community involved, and how do you be innovative about it, because you can't keep doing the same thing and expect the results. So I would say great job, and just keep doing it.
Let me thank you for that. And as much as we want to celebrate the process and the product, especially on community involvement, we engaged as best we could over 2,000 people touch this, and if we look at the number of lines that we analyzed in terms of suggestions for changes, we did as best as we could to listen to folks. But there are other folks who haven't participated, and for whatever reasons, and some of that may be that they're disengaged by a system like ours in the first place. So part of the strategy and the action is to reach beyond, to include everyone we can include, but then to reach beyond and not be satisfied until we keep finding the mom or the grandpa, as we mentioned, who isn't writing the note, so that we can hear their voice as well.
I did have a granular question.
Sure.
And I would have asked it sooner had I thought about it sooner, so I just, but it came to me today. When you're talking about one of the outcome measures under finance was the amount of the capital projects still to be done, which I think I heard was like $100 million in capital work or something. And I wondered why, and I guess I'll look at you, Mary. Did anybody talk about it? One of the measurements at least being how much money we have to spend on capital, looking at what your debt service extension base is it at least a measurement so that we're talking about it? I don't know if it's really a measurement, but we don't have the money to do a lot of the work. And I just wondered, I probably would have brought this up much sooner if I had thought about it, but today it made me think about that, whether we should look at the money we have to do the projects.
The document does refer to capital projects being funded, thinking of additional ways to fund capital projects, which would include, potential referenda and other additional revenue sources.
Well, I guess I think, really, to me,
You're looking at maybe a combo of the two. I mean, it sounds like a ratio of
Yes.
a ratio
That's
of
very good.
that's what
what's available to what's outstanding. Some kind of ratio look at the
But we've
those two
also talked
factors.
as a board, Katie, and I think your comment makes sense about having some baseline. How much are we going to keep in reserve for capital projects that might come up unexpectedly? And so maybe it doesn't end up actually being shown as a ratio, but we have to look at one in the context of the other.
That's right. And, kind of what we talked about a little bit that will come up later in outcomes, and is if you're not looking at it, then talk about transparency. I think people don't understand, people like, sometimes not even us on the board, we get confused about how much money we have. If we don't have it out there, then we're not talking about why can't we do all the work we're doing. So I don't know if there is something we could use the debt service.
Of the many milestones in the plan, there are milestones around making our information about our finances, our operating expenditures, and our capital expenditures more understandable. Not that they're not understandable now or they're not transparent, but more understandable. And so where do we start, and then what would that look like, and then how do we gauge that as progress is something that we will consider.
So I don't know if there could be something about the debt service extension base. I don't know if it's too late, but it might be worthwhile thinking about it. And just one other question I had, you said, I remember, Paul, in something I read, you sent to us that you're going to do the executive summary, but you just said you'll do a 3 to 4 page summary. Is that your executive summary?
Well, yeah, I think our goal, and again, by the end of the month, we have to take this to press so that we have the full document, so with all of the details. But our goal is to have a 4 or 6 pager that's understandable and very clear, that can highlight the directions we're going in, and that can be used as in Claudia's sense, this is a usable product in its entirety, but how do we make it so that people can really understand it and understand both the values of what's in, the milestone of what's in, and what the accountability measures are. So that will be a shorter version that we'll prepare as we go towards, in April, I would assume.
And I just said this too, when you get to the longer version of this will be laid out in such a way that will be easier. You'll have all the headers and all that. And
yes, we will.
Yeah, okay. So I just want to make
This is
sure,
a Word
because I was
document.
having trouble. I just wanted to make sure. All right, cool.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
We have the designers poised and ready.
Yay, I
to
love
go.
those designers. Okay, it's great. Those are my granular questions.
I have one question, but Cindy, did you have anything? I'm wondering what we expect in terms of how specific you get, both in March or April, what is it? And then in August, what should our expectations be in terms of what that plan will look like?
I think that's a good question. So I think the March 23rd, you'll see the designed version of what we have today. And if we have some time, either in that version, Richard, your question, or in at least commentary, we can come back and give you a first take on the priorities over time that then we'll work on in the months ahead. I think by August, we'll have a review of where we are on all of the milestones and be able to get into much more detail on what we're prioritizing, what we're working on in years 1 through 5, but really in the first couple of years, so people and you can see where we're at.
Thank you. All right, now shall we go to the measures?
Let's go to the measures, and I'm going to turn to Peter, and I'll
Peter.
go take my seat back there. But thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right. Let me dig in here, and in your board packet, you've got a memo from me. The couple of pages at the end of it that have some sample scorecards are a good place to reference if you want to look in one place at just a couple of pages about the measures that you should expect to see coming out of our planning process. I want to take just a minute to start out with to review what the guiding principles were that we used as we developed these measures. There is a tremendous amount of data that we sit on and a tremendous amount of additional data that in a world where it wouldn't inconvenience others, I would love to collect so that we could know more about what's happening in our schools. So in sifting through that, there are 5 key principles that we used to decide what would be most appropriate. So first was, we wanted to pick some outcome measures from this plan that could serve as a North Star. By that I mean, how will we know when this plan is done, whether we have positively affected our students? We also wanted to make sure that whatever outcome measures we picked, they would relate directly to our mission. And the heart of that mission is academic and personal growth for our students. Third, we wanted to have the outcome measures be clear and relatively few in number. And we wanted to make sure that there was a clear relationship between those measures and the activities in the strategic plan. So we didn't want to choose something where the activities in the plan were unlikely to impact it in terms of our outcome measures. And last, we wanted to make sure that we didn't take on any additional data collection burden unless the data that we would collect would have value for principals and teachers. So we didn't want to engage in data collection just for the sake of being able to measure the plan. We wanted to use the data we have or collect new data that could also be useful to teachers and to principals. So with that in mind, there are 5 outcome measures that we have recommended here as the ultimate outcomes for our plan. The first looks at early literacy skills from K to 2, and for that we would use 2 assessments, the ISIL assessment and the DRA assessment. The DRA complements the ISIL in measuring reading comprehension skills, whereas ISIL gets at more basic literacy skills. For example, in kindergarten it looks at, do you know the letters in the alphabet? Can you identify them in both lower and in uppercase? It looks at phonemic awareness, and then it gets into some basic abilities in spelling. So we've had some initial conversations at how does the performance on these assessments compare to what we're looking for in later years. And as we look to implement these and bring them to you in August, we're going to need to do some research and expectation setting about exactly where do we want to set the bar on these assessments. But as we set the baseline, what we know is that we want to track and see our students in K-2 developing the early literacy skills they need to be successful later in their careers here in District 65. Second, we want to look at the percent of students who are meeting college readiness benchmarks on the map. So these are students whose scores put them on track to obtain college-ready scores when they get into high school. Third, we want to look at the percentage of students in reading and math who are below the 25th percentile. So these are the students that we know to be struggling in those 2 subjects. And we've seen in the last few years an increase in the percentage of students who are in this category. So we want to make sure not just to track whether students are obtaining that college-ready bar, but also we want to make sure that we're shrinking the population of students who are falling in the lowest band of performance. Next, we want to track the percent of students who are making expected gains. So this allows us to know, no matter where the student starts at the beginning of the year, are they making adequate progress compared to their national peers? And then lastly, in terms of academic outcome measures, we want to track achievement gaps by income and race. And so in order to do this, what we would do is use the college readiness benchmark measure on the map and report it out for each of our race and income subgroups. And you can see that on the sample scorecard that I provided you. And last, this is a non-academic measure, but out of the 5 essential survey, there is a measure of academic challenge. And this looks at questions. Let me just give you a couple of examples. This is based on middle school students' responses on the 5 essential survey. It asks questions like, the class challenges me. The teacher asks difficult questions in class and on tests. I really learned a lot in this class. This class really makes me think. This class requires me to work hard to do well. So really, it's a student's self-report on whether the coursework that they're engaged in is challenging. So with these ultimate outcome measures, our proposal is to couple them with the measures that you see throughout the strategic plan into a strategic plan scorecard that we would report to you once a year in August. And you've got a copy of that in your board packet. That scorecard would be supplemented by 3 other accountability reports that you would have access to and that we would make publicly available. One is a strategic plan board progress report. And so to our earlier conversation, that really is reporting out on the progress that we are making in achieving the milestones in the strategic plan. Our achievement and accountability report that you've had historically would continue, but would also be refined. And it would be refined to include deeper levels of analysis about these key outcome measures that I just described, as well as it would be a place for us to include leading indicators, some of which we still need to do some work to develop. So for example, we're really interested in looking at a measure of kindergarten readiness, and we know that we have some data already that would allow us to calculate that measure. We know whether kids have some pre-K experience, and based on the early literacy assessments I just mentioned, we know about their literacy skills when they come into kindergarten. When you think about what it means to be ready for kindergarten, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's pre-numeracy skills, lots of social emotional skills, and those are things that we would have to work over time to figure out how we would want to measure. But we know that we can at least begin by looking at the data we have on literacy and pre-kindergarten experience to be able to get a read on whether our students are coming to us ready. That then gives us a screen for looking at how students do later on these other outcome measures based on how they were performing when they arrived. Lastly, we've talked about the District 65, District 202 Joint Accountability Report, and this will be a place for us to look at how students perform in Evanston and Skokie across both of our districts and also in combination with the services of our community providers, including pre-kindergarten programs. So we're just getting started on that work to figure out what that's going to look like, but it's another place where we can begin to look at some of the factors outside of just the in-school achievement in District 65. So let me leave it there and take your questions.
Thanks, Peter. Questions? Claudia?
On the 5 essential survey and the student self-reporting on how they feel, would you break apart, disaggregate, I think it is, reading and math? Because right now, there are very different outcomes. The latest 5E data on that. Because I was, like, reading really needs to be stepped up because students are not as happy there as they are with math. And if we don't keep those separate, we wouldn't know that, I think.
Yeah, so the survey that we have today doesn't allow us to do that. The questions that are asked there students are asked to think about a particular class. I think it's based on the time of day of the class, or students are randomized into different classes. So the data doesn't allow us to disaggregate in the way that you're talking about. I think it's a great idea, and we could certainly talk to the University of Chicago about whether they're able to do it over time. But this particular academic press measure isn't available to us in that way.
Where would I have seen that information then? Because I remember looking and seeing students were like, in math, they were 90% happy with the challenges of the class, and
It was in our own survey.
oh, that was our own?
There-
We did
Oh.
break it out in our own survey.
Okay.
Happy with the curriculum, happy with, yeah.
And also in the 5 Essentials survey, there are reading instruction and math instruction measures that we could look at as well. But this particular measure is getting at the feeling of challenge, and the measure is actually called academic press. So it really has to do with how much are my teachers pressing me or encouraging me to achieve
Okay,
the
I
best
was
I can.
assuming it was the same thing, but it's
Yeah,
not.
there is another 2 measures based on a different set of questions.
That's it?
Okay.
I just have, so when I look at the outcome measures, is there any thought to giving one for the thriving workforce section as a way to sort of, make sure that those strategies that we've talked about are actually being successful? And I know that some of that will be qualitative, but is there any way, or have you started thinking about, most of these focus on MAP, but there's so many other parts of the strategic plan that are outside of MAP. How will you measure those other sections? And I guess community involved, you can look at some of those other things that are not measured by MAP. How will you say that we're successful as a plan?
So let me answer your question in 2 ways. One about thriving workforce and some of the other areas in the plan, and the other being about how might we measure some other things that we want children to learn. So when you think about thriving workforce, if you flipped further into that memo, or you look in the strategic plan, for each part of the plan, we've identified some leading indicators. So for example, for thriving workforce, we would look at employee job satisfaction, number of new hires that are hired from currently underrepresented groups, employee groups. We would look at the experience of new hires. We would look at what percentage of our new hires are coming before July 1st. And we would look at the percent of applicants referred through partnerships that we would establish with preparation institutions. So those are some of the leading indicators of a thriving workforce that we will track, with the idea that that lets us know whether we are on track with that particular strategy, while the student outcomes are the things that we want to move as a result of having a thriving workforce.
So we would use the first year as the benchmark and just track against, is that the plan? Okay.
I think with the exception of the employee job satisfaction, which we think we need the first year to identify the right tool and get it implemented. So that would be the one where we would set the baseline in a year out, as opposed to having a baseline ready in August.
I just want to add something to that because I think you raised a good point. I think a survey could be really helpful. I think we also know that actions often speak louder than how people might respond to a survey. And something I know we've talked about at different points is using teacher retention as a measure. And are we keeping our best teachers? And when I listen to your criteria for, are we collecting it? Would it be useful for teachers and principals to know, and go down the list? I think it meets all of the criteria that are there. It's data that we're already collecting. It's just a matter of putting it together and making sure that we're keeping our best teachers. And since we know that is one of the variables that has such a powerful impact on student outcomes, and it's a variable that the district has a lot of control over, right? We can do a lot to retain good teachers. We, I think, have to be tracking that. And I believe so strongly that we have to. I just think that I'd really like to hear anyone advocate for why we shouldn't be tracking that in the strategic plan, because it just, to me, doesn't make sense to not include it.
Well, I think it actually is in the thriving workforce section to do.
Is it?
Yeah,
to do an effort and a report on
Retention.
specifically that.
Then I missed
retention,
when I read it.
As well as, but let me distinguish that from
Okay.
it being a success measure. To look at retention, and then to look as we are able to look at retention by performance category. So, and I asked the same question as well. So I think it's there as an intentional part of the work of us being able to look at that, has not been integrated as a success measure. And I mean, that may be one that we want to see the reporting, to see the data, to see how effective it is. Because I'll be quite frank, if we use retention as a measure, it doesn't necessarily tell us anything. We may be retaining teachers, but unless we couple it with, you know, an assessment around retaining the
And that's
best
what, I hope
teachers.
that's what I said is, you know, keeping our
Well,
best teachers.
At first you said retention. So, I mean, I think there's definitely differences. So a broad base, like just looking at retention as a success measure, I wouldn't necessarily agree with. So I think that's why I like the way it was presented as integrating a new set of, what do you call them? Data delivery thingy reports. So that we would be able to use that information and use it over time in decision making.
Would that have been a change that you made since the weekend? Because I'm just
No.
looking at the measures of success and under.
No, I just said
Dragon
it was
Force.
not in the measures of success. It was in the actual,
It's in the actual plan.
in the text of the Thriving Workforce section.
So if what I'm hearing is if it's not in the measures of success, it's not going to be part of the scorecard that we see. Is that right? I see a couple
Yeah.
other heads nodding, but they're not. Is that right?
That's right. So what we've proposed as a milestone is to create a retention report, and the purpose for that would be to not only break it down based on evaluation data, but also based on information from exit interviews about the reasons that people are leaving.
Okay, so would the intention be then for that retention report that on an annual basis, the board is seeing, you know, retention cross-referenced with other?
That would get
Yes.
Okay.
Good.
Okay.
Is there a reason that we wouldn't put that in as a measure of success? Or, excuse me, it's not really measures, I mean, I guess if we have employee satisfaction surveys as a measure of success, this, you know, in part relates to that. So I see it though, not just as an outcome, but as an indication. If we're keeping great teachers, we have a better likelihood that we're going to see the outcomes, the student outcomes that we want. So I guess my question is there a reason we wouldn't put it in as a measure of success? Especially since we're already looking at satisfaction. I think this is even more concrete.
If we're getting the retention report, once again, we don't know when the milestone will be. That one will be created, right? So, because there's, how many milestones?
70.
70-ish.
So could we, could we because we will get that once the retention report is created, and then if it's created annually from that point forward, we'll get the data. It may be worthwhile letting them go back and figure out the timing of that all, because that is a lot of data. I mean, as long as we're getting it one way or another.
I guess my question is, but if we're going to get it, why wouldn't we just put it in as a measure of success?
Well, we just might not get it the first year because it's that by definition makes that priority one. And I don't know if we're ready, right? I mean, I agree, but there's a lot of priorities. So couldn't we let them set the priorities and then go forward once it's created?
I guess what I'm voicing is and in part, it's because I have been harping on this for 4 years. I have asked for this exact sort of information for 4 years, and we have never gotten it. And it is so, I mean, we all know that the teacher is a variable that we as a district control in terms of having influence, compared to lots of other variables that we have no control over that impact student outcomes. And so to me, this has urgency that we just need to get our arms around it.
I'd like to echo what you're saying, because there's a difference between, you can have a lot of not so hot teachers very satisfied to work here, but you want to know that you're keeping the ones who really contribute.
I want to make sure we can deliver on this.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that we can deliver also with quality. And I don't know, as a matter of fact, what the data are that we have and the degree to which we can, what our commitment is that we want to do the report and we hear the push. But I want to see what the reporting processes are and how we would actually do that before we would say, I don't want to put a false indicator in here with a red, yellow, green, without it being a really solid report. So, but the intentionality is to move and to move fast.
Can we find out before we vote to approve this, to see what might, if it's something that you would feel comfortable doing? And I am pushing on this.
Well, I guess the only thing I want to hold back on, and it is only because there are milestones that I think are incredibly important, both within finance and instructional, totally lost my topic, but, high quality instruction. And I'm not saying that yours isn't really important too, but I actually appreciate your comment earlier about prioritizing and giving them a chance. And I thought Paul was really honest and said, we're going to print it and let us give us the time. I think if we've got the commitment from the administration to do the report and then set the priorities, understanding that it is your priority and Claudia's, that it be number one. But I actually think Claudia would agree that some of the high quality instruction is a priority too. And I'm reticent to set, I know you're ready to set the priority, but I would sit back and say, well, if we don't have the money, that should be the priority because the operating deficit is. So can we let them set the priorities, knowing that it's very, very important to you, as long as we're having the report, and that once the report is done, that it's tracked over time?
But I didn't think it was we were setting a priority. I thought we were just arguing that it should be one of the things that's included in the list of other things that we're including.
Well, except that if
Since
it's not.
As a success measure.
But the thing is, are the things that you're talking about as important, are they measures, or are they, programmatic initiatives, or because this is a measure.
Right, but it's both a measure and a milestone.
It's a measure and a milestone. That's what I'm saying.
I mean, it's fair to say the implementation planning of this, right, is the responsibility of the administrative team. I hope we all believe that.
Totally agree.
And this is part of because it's a milestone, it doesn't exist today. It's one of those things that does not exist today. There is another one that does not exist today, the the employee satisfaction survey, correct? Mm-hmm. That does not exist today. And so in year one, at the very best, you're going to find it and potentially, as you said, it may not be the baseline year. Mm-hmm. So I would like to see us be able to deliver the report first, and then we can integrate it as a success measure from there on.
I was going to ask, is this a corruption of the process to say, can we review the success measures as we're looking at the implementation plan to say, are those the things such as the retention plan or financial stability that we think are important enough? Because I understand the importance of keeping it simple, but there are different critical pieces that we're not going to be measuring at all that I would feel more comfortable with some knowledge of when and how we measure them. Not to say these are all the most important, but we might want to revisit it when we look at the strategies for the rollout, that maybe we've missed a couple of those, because it's hard to know what they'll be without knowing what the work plan is going to look like.
So I think it makes sense. I would say it in a couple ways. One is, as we go forward, our ability to measure is going to improve. We're going to revisit our assessment system. We're going to have report cards that are more meaningful, and so perhaps that might mean that we would have different data about students' social emotional skills, for example. So I think there are the context in which we're introducing this is that our ability to measure is going to improve. We're going to know our data better. And so I think both our ability to measure will be better, and we'll know more about the implementation of the plan. So I don't see it as a problem that we would come to August and say, oh, okay, now, we've been working on this and we think, let's add this measure because we think it's better. Or maybe it's 2 years from now, we look at a measure and we say, this isn't really getting us what we need, we want to swap it out for something else. So I see the ability to refine the measures as the same as it would be to refine milestones as we go forward.
Can I distinguish that for success measures versus outcome measures?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
just to be clear.
Yes. Thank you.
Because I totally in sync with that on the success measure front, not quite as much on the outcome measures
I
as
agree
trying
with
to shift midstream.
I mean, that's all I was going to say. Those outcome measures, I think we have to be all buy into and say, okay, these are what we're set with outcome measures. Because I think they're fabulous, and I won't be here in August, so I don't want them to change. No, but I really think you need to set your outcome measures and not be changing those
Okay,
every
then
time.
I think we need to, I have a couple comments
Well,
about them.
Since we're on
Yeah.
the thriving workforce thing, one of the measures of success you have in here, and this was a question I raised, and this was one that I wanted to bring to here tonight. Average years of experience of new hires. Do we have a standard that we think is desirable? Like we'd like 90% of our new hires to have at least 3 years of experience and master's degrees? I mean, because it's nice, it's an interesting piece of information to know, but without any standard of which we're holding it up to, I'm not sure that it does us much good.
Yeah, I think you make a good point in that I'm not sure what that measure should be. The reason that we've included it is that we wanted to have a diversity of experience among our staff. And so, for example, if the number were 1 or 0, then that would be something that it's a context measure really that we would want to pay attention to. So I think if there was consensus that this isn't a measure we want to pursue, it may be one that we would want to eliminate.
Okay.
I do have a couple other things. Just in terms of outcome measures, I heard you specify income and race. And I think it was the last measure regarding the achievement gap. And I would advocate that we include a couple other subgroups. One is special education versus general education. I think when you look at our achievement gap, in many, many instances, that's actually the most challenging gap that we have. And so if we're going to break it out by subgroups, I think we have to include that just because it is significant. And the other is one that isn't as significant, but I think it's something we need to monitor, and that's gender. You know, I think that has very slightly trended, not positively, that the gap since I've been on the board has seemed to have grown a little bit, and I think it's worth continuing to monitor that. And I think that's data that we already collect and report on and would be useful to teachers and principals and all of those criteria as well.
And I would add to that, because we do speak to it specifically in the plan when we're talking about reaching struggling learners, ELL students. And I think we already capture that.
Yeah, so we do capture that. From a measurement perspective, that's where it gets tricky. Because while students are in the English learning program, by definition, they are learning English. So measuring the gap based on the assessment in English is a little bit misleading. So we've talked about some ways of working around that. For example, looking at what student proficiency is after they complete the English learning program. But we need some more time to figure out how to measure that well.
That makes sense.
But I agree, the concept of the performance of our English learners is really important.
Sure. Can I push back a little bit on I will. I'll ask permission.
Okay.
On the gender piece. I understand what you're saying. My concern is to the point about outcome measures being measuring things that we are clear we have activities that we're directing in the plan towards changing. So I can say there's a great deal of the plan that is focused on driving the achievement gap around race, away and driving it away relative to students with disabilities. And so I totally concur there. I don't think that we've talked or entertained or have any point of view on how we might address achievement gaps relative to gender. And so I think having that as information on our accountability report that we look at and we monitor is valid, but incorporating it as a component of our outcome measures when we're not specifically doing anything specific to address it, I would be concerned.
I think it makes sense.
Okay.
Culturally
I agree.
sensitive teaching and
What?
the boy culture, girl culture.
Yes,
that sort of.
maybe those materials should be updated.
I have one
Yeah,
more,
that's
and I
fine.
may have missed this in the rewrite of the plan, so tell me if I did, and I'll be very brief. Early childhood participation, did that make it in, when I was rereading, and I didn't reread in as much detail as I did the first couple of times that I saw this, but the participation rate specifically.
So in our conversation, the purpose of these outcome measures is to measure the outcomes of our district. that would be a great outcome, for example, for the Cradle to Career initiative, but for us, it's really more a context measure. And so the place where we imagined that that would come is in the Joint Accountability Report.
The joint accountability?
And because we saw that as a place where we would track the progress of children throughout Evanston and Skokie. And so that's a key time point in measuring that progress.
But wouldn't it be a key component of kindergarten readiness?
It would.
So you would
yeah.
build that, it would be a component of that
So
measure, I would think.
there are two ways, there are multiple ways to do this. One is in the kindergarten readiness as we develop it, and the question is what sort of data do we have, and then what sort of data do we need? A second one is as much a brainstorm idea right now. Wouldn't it be great to have a conditions of children in Evanston and Skokie report? And so as Peter refers to the joint accountability work, we've started that brainstorming with our colleagues at 202 on what is it that we know about children and families across both cities that actually apply to our educational enterprise. That's a longer term development to be able to do, to be able to document that work, and it also overlaps with the Cradle to Career work that we're engaged in.
Well, let me just be clear. I wasn't, and I didn't specify this, so I will now. I wasn't proposing that it be an outcome measure,
Okay.
but maybe more in the measures of success or.
Yeah, I think, I mean, where I had envisioned, based on other discussions, was potentially in family community engagement as a success measure, because and one area that was updated was the integration of early childhood partnerships
Yes,
as
I saw
a
that.
thrust and a focal priority for that area. But you're right, we didn't necessarily, it wasn't necessarily added as a leading indicator. So, you know, and again, in my head, I was thinking of it being integrated with the kindergarten readiness. It's possible that we could in the near term, and I'm just putting out the option, you guys have to decide. In the near term, I would think it could belong there as a potential indicator of the value of those partnerships and how we are working on, you know, the joint literacy and extending into the community around partnering with the early childhood community, starting with the marker, right, of what's the baseline, and then looking at it over time within family and community engagement. Seems like that might be, because that is data we have today, we get it today.
And it would be useful for teachers and principals to know, for the incoming students, what their early childhood experience has been. And
Yeah. So that would be one proposal for a possible change. Or the other thing, the alternative is, you know, integrating with it with a kindergarten readiness overall factoring.
And however you decide to handle that, what I would just ask is when we get the next almost final version, whatever it will be,
It will
just
be final.
Let us
It
know
won't be
how
final.
you
Right.
decide to treat that.
And part of that is, without complaining, is also an issue that I want to make sure that Peter and team, actually, we have the capacity to produce some of the data that we have along with all the reports. And so we, in the spirit of being honest, we may come back and say, we're fully committed to this, but we can't do it alone. We may need some help. We may need to combine with other folks in the community to be able to produce the type of work that is necessary.
Let me just probe on that a little bit, because we track that now, right?
Right.
So where do you think there would be the effort, or what would be problematic?
I just want to make sure that we have the data systems ready, that we have the analyst who can do it. Peter can't do it all. And so so I just want to make sure that we can produce in a timely manner the type of information that we have. There's information we have, and then there's the harvesting of it and the reporting out. And I just want to make sure that we can deliver.
And being clear,
Well,
we're not asking to push this back to earlier age, right? You're not making that request. It would be based on the kindergarten registration
Yes.
as to their pre-K
Right.
experience. Not that, because we've envisioned long-term, and I think that's where you're getting to the state of families, can we look into
Broader.
the pipeline?
Yes.
If you want to use
Which
a
is
really
much
rough
deeper.
term of, infancy coming up and what we should expect in affecting that down into that pipeline. That's not what we're talking about here, but would be using that
Thank
data
you
that we-
for specifying. That's
But-
not what I was talking about.
Perhaps we should be thinking, I mean, we have the data, but we don't, as far as I know, have any mechanism of saying, okay, now, do we get that data to the teachers so that they can make their lesson plans according to the readiness of the kids that they have. I mean, that's what we need to happen. I mean, it's nice to know, but unless we're doing something with it and are holding teachers accountable to do something with it,
So one of the nuances in the plan is that we recognize that there are multiple teams at the school level who are working on a wide range of issues. And what we want to do over time is engage these teams around how do we actually provide the right type of data for decision-making, both at the team level and then at the individual teacher level. And that will take some time, but because there's a PBIS team and there's an instructional leadership team and there's a principal and they have a data team themselves. So we talk about data teams in here. And again, it's not when we have information, we can actually, I think, produce it. I just want to make sure we can produce it in a timely and usable fashion so it's not just being dumped on our colleagues at the schools. And so some of that is really the how do we go from information to usable information.
You done, Richard?
I am.
Peter, I have one question about the measures, and I brought it up before, so you won't be surprised by this. And it is, I think it's because differentiation has been such a push in this district for so long, and we've had such trouble measuring whether it's actually reaching every classroom. I'm concerned about whether we're capturing growth across the spectrum in a way that I would like to, because when I look at it, you know, we've seen our achievement fall at the top end and the bottom end of the spectrum and sort of come into the middle more. And we don't have anything in place to measure those children who are over the career and college readiness standard, which is 60% of our kids. So I think that we need a more nuanced measure to see where, because we want to make sure it's every child every day, that we're meeting the needs of every child. And I think we're we're only getting sort of too rough an estimate for that achievement. So.
I definitely hear you. Let me tell you what I was thinking about how would that come for discussion, and then we can talk about how to maybe handle it differently if you want to. The expected gains measure would require that students at all points in the performance spectrum make increases. So since 60% of our students meet that college readiness benchmark, we couldn't possibly get above 40% on this without those students also making moves. And much like we did in this year's Achievement and Accountability Report, we would continue to break that down so we can see the finer grain detail. So in this year's report, we had how were students overall doing with expected gains, and then we looked at both the top and bottom quartile students. So we could do something similar, which would allow us to keep a relatively tight focus in this report while also providing that deeper level of analysis in the Achievement and Accountability Report.
I agree with that would be a good way to approach it. I actually think that it's important enough that it should be in one of the outcome measures, because I think we're committed to every student in the district, and when we're saying we're only going to do it as sort of the second iteration to look at those 60% of the students. I think it's significant enough that differentiation is key. It's the foundation of all of our instructional strategies, and we really want to make sure that's implemented solidly. And it seems to be something we've chased for a long time, and so to me, that would be a significant outcome measure. But I don't know how everyone else feels.
Well, I was just going to say that you are aware, at least if you're using MAP as the measure, that the better the student does, the harder it is for them to make the annual growth, and that the standard deviation on either side gets bigger. So that, to me,
But we still don't know where that growth is happening, even if you know it's 40% or 50%. Is it in the middle? Is it at the bottom? Is it at the top? Or is it spread out evenly? That would indicate that we're differentiating effectively if it was spread out. If it's clumped somewhere, then it means that we're teaching to the middle, we're teaching to the top end, and we're letting
I'm not sure that measure shows whether you're hitting that top group effectively or not.
Okay,
I think there might be other measures that...
Maybe that's not the right
I'm just not sure it's MAP, just because I think of the deficiencies of MAP.
So I really like these outcomes. I think I worry that we're going to start to create an accountability report in this. So my concern is well, two. Number one, I think we get at that, well, one, by the way you said, Peter, through expected growth. And the second is, what I really liked was, now that I know what an academic press means, because I thought it was like a publishing house, but now that I know it means academic press, I actually like that measure a lot, because that's our kids being challenged, and that's really what we want, our kids being challenged every day. My other concern is if you're concerned over the top, and
It's not top, it's the 60% that are over the career.
So is that what you want to look at?
Yeah. I mean,
Well,
I
the
think we
only
need
thing-
to look at the whole spectrum, but I'm worried that since the benchmark is right here and 60% of our kids are here, that we have nothing that we're measuring whether they're
Well-
growing, if they're all equally growing, or are we actually teaching here, we're teaching the top and letting these kids stagnate? I mean, what does it look like, 60% of our kids?
Well, I mean, you're getting data in different ways. So you're looking at the gap. So if the gap is growing or shrinking because they're coming down, you're going to look at it that way. The second thing is, if you're only looking at the 60%, you've got the 25% below, the lower quartile, right? And then you've got the 60%. So what happens between
You're measuring what?
you're missing a group. You're missing the middle then. So then we're back to setting quartile analysis, right? If you've got, and I'm just, because you can't just say you're going to worry about one group or the
top
other.
and the bottom, no. I mean, I was wondering, this is what I said to Peter, is there a way to capture that, to figure out, is it looking at the stay-nines, just looking at stay-nine growth? So I don't think we should just look at the top and just look at the bottom, but is there a measure that would capture whether how our growth is distributed? Maybe that's the question. Whether it's equally distributed or whether we're...
I don't think there's a great way to get at that without using a number of metrics, which is why I was recommending putting it in the other report. I think hearing some of what you're saying, I wonder whether a measure of the expected gains for those students who meet college readiness benchmarks and maybe for those who don't. I think in the Achievement and Accountability Report, you probably want to slice the data into a number of different slices, and whether that be 4 categories or 9, and understand what does growth look like for various subgroups.
So did you just say you could take the expected growth and do it
Chunk it into two.
to two chunks? Would that do it?
At least you could have a measure.
Yeah.
that's-
Yeah, that would.
And then
I mean,
have more of the detail.
I wouldn't have trouble with that. That would, because you're getting both expected gains by those who are at college and career and those who are not. That would that would be great.
And would, go ahead,
Sorry,
John.
yeah,
Peter's so creative.
I just want to go back to, and just ask a question about the guiding principles, and I think Peter's first one here is the North Star, and having just distinguishing between the key outcome indicators and all of the complexity of information that can be and will be provided in the Achievement and Accountability Report. And I feel like I've heard the board give us very clear direction in the past that where we are most concerned are the 40% that are currently not meeting college and career readiness benchmarks, and that we need to invest time, invest effort, and strategies to address that group. And so I guess I would wonder if, I think many of the outcome indicators are going to beg the question why, and some deeper dives on all of them. And so would you be comfortable with those whys and additional information being provided in the Achievement Accountability Report that would be a necessary addendum to the key outcome indicators? I'm just trying to keep with the guiding principles that Peter laid out.
Yeah, I think, I will say, in this point of differentiation is what is the sticking point, because, as I've offered, I don't think we really don't have leading indicators around differentiation identified within high quality teaching learning as yet. So I think that puts the pressure on the outcome measures even more so to tell that story right now. And I understand that we don't want to create new data collection tools. I understand, and perhaps over time, as we start with the instructional frameworks, then we might also, by virtue of having a new instructional framework, measuring against that instructional framework, have something that's embedded. So I'm going off off message a little bit here, but my interest in potentially in having something that is a little bit more granular, that looks at differentiating an outcome, is because I don't think we have it today in the leading indicators at the working group level. Ultimately, that's where I actually think it most belongs, that we should be looking at some leading indicator of whether we are differentiating effectively in the classroom and how, what the pervasiveness of that is, what the consistency of that is, but we don't have a good way to do that that's not extremely costly, right? And so we aren't incorporating that today. So not doing that, I think we'd still have to have some way with the data that we do have at the outcome measure level to be able to assess that, because it is clearly a very important, underpinning strategy for the whole plan.
But do you want to measure whether teachers are using differentiation as a technique? Or do you want to measure whether students who that we assume that there is differentiation going on, that it's working for all students?
All students.
I mean, which is those are two entirely different things.
They are,
because
first you gotta do it,
differentiation is
and
such
then
a
you gotta
complex.
measure whether it's working.
But it's such a complex thing. I mean, there's no one definition.
I understand that. I totally understand that. That's why we get to
it.
the point where we don't have a leading or multiple leading indicators for it. I get that it's complex, but my point, the way I'm trying to connect the thread is, because we don't have that, then the burden becomes more to be able to describe that in some way in the outcome measures of whether it's actually effective or not. And so,
but you won't find that unless you make sure everybody's doing it, and then you might be pressuring teachers to use ineffective strategies.
So I'm not saying that.
She's just saying
I'm just saying that we don't have measures on saying whether it's happening or effective, and we're not going to do that. But then by virtue of that, we still need to be able to look at whether ultimately it's successful or not, right? Because we still have the strategy, we're still committed to the strategy, and we're committed to improving upon the work that we're doing in this plan.
But what differentiation is supposed to do is to increase student engagement. I mean, ultimately,
It's also-
that's
And-
why you do it.
And that's-
And when they're
Academic
more
press numbers
engaged,
will go
then
up.
they do better.
Right, and that's one of the reasons why we included the academic press measure, because that is an outcome measure of engagement and challenge. And that's why I push for that. But there also is then the ultimate outcome, which is,
I think that's
At
a
the end
good
of the day.
leading indicator, but that is subjective somewhat. So to know whether the press is resulting in the achievement we're looking for is kind of a nice way to do both front end and back end.
I guess because I was the one who's pushing back on it, but Peter, once you said that, if we
do that.
if just looking at it into two groups, to me, that you're looking at, are you getting the expected expected growth at both levels? It just seems to me, if you're comfortable with that as an outcome measure, I know it's slightly more, John, and I agree that I want to push back, but I feel like this may give something that this board has been asking for a long time, and understanding. If you think we can do it,
So let me ask this clarifying question, whether you would be comfortable, rather than having one expected gains measure, basically having two. So rather than reporting it out overall, we would look at the students who meet college readiness and those who don't? Or would you want to have?
Yeah, two.
I think
Okay.
that would be helpful. Yeah. And John, that's not to say that we're setting the same goal for both of those groups. Maybe it's that we need to see more gain in the ones that haven't made college and career. But I think having knowledge of that is really critical for us knowing whether our strategies, how effective and where they're effective.
So if I may, if the difference between having knowledge of it and the difference of setting it, if you put it on my one page as an outcome indicator, it becomes very important to me to see that cell be green. So the knowledge of it I think could come from the Achievement Accountability Report and allow us to ask and answer the question, why and for whom? But I think if it goes on the outcome indicator sheet, where it goes on my strategic indicators for my strategy, that becomes a strategy.
Well,
and I think that is somewhat of a change of focus from what I've heard from you.
But it may be
by
that the
default-
green, it turns green for the students below college and career ready for a different number than it does for those over, because we say percentage, we haven't clarified what
What the
percent of
percent.
students, what the rate of growth should be. So it may be that we say the rate of growth for these students does not need to be as high as the students, because we want to clear, but we do want to know that they're growing, don't we?
But again, I think John's
Sure.
point is we're going to know that when we get the
When you get all.
achievement and accountability report.
I think it's a goal, though, that we have all our students growing. I mean,
I
that may be
think
that's
Candace
valuable, but I
described,
think it's,
I think Candace's description of, you know, the connections to the plan and that it's really foundational, as you gave your description 10 minutes ago. For me, that's what makes it important that it be part of the strategic plan and not just in the accountability report.
I think the other piece of it, and Peter, you said this in the beginning, the reality is that 60% of our students, right, are above that college career readiness. So it would be, I think, mathematically impossible for, if you just had the same measure as theirs today and not broken out into two pieces, because you already have a growth measure, right? We already are saying growth for all students is critical, and we're going to want positive growth from whatever the baseline is. So because 60% of the students are in that category already, I believe, now, yes, you get skewed by huge growth on the lower end. Is that what you're saying? That I don't think we want to send the message that it may be more important to get higher growth on the low end, because that's required to ultimately make standards, right? We need to get there, but we're not saying we want higher growth on the low end and negative growth on the top end. So that's all we're saying, and I don't think that anywhere in the plan, nothing that we're saying in the plan, all the things we're working on around differentiation enable us to improve performance for all students. So I would not think that it's inconsistent with what's already there today, is all I'm saying.
any other? So will we come back with another, when we see this plan again, we'll have a version of, I mean, and there are very few changes except perhaps to the measures. The additions to the percent of students, the breakout, we're adding special ed and ELLs. No, we decided not.
No.
So it's just special ed and not gender. And then looking at above and below the college and career for growth. So those are the only two changes. Katie?
Are we going to vote on this too?
Yes.
The same, so the 23rd, we're going to vote on this.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So,
And early,
Well, just understanding
I think
where that will fit in.
that's important for some clarification there.
What is?
Where early childhood will fit in.
so could I play back what I think are 4 changes? And that way I can just test that this is right before we move forward. Change 1, as you just said, Tracy, would be that we would add disabilities, a disability status as one of the achievement gap categories. 2, as you just said, is that we would break the expected gains measure down into those who achieve college readiness and those who don't. Then in the measures of success that are part of the plan itself, we would do a little bit more thinking on the average years of experience and decide whether there's a better measure or whether that measure should come out. And then under family and community engagement, we would look at adding either pre-K participation or a measure of kindergarten readiness as a leading indicator in that strategy area.
And where did we land on the retention thing?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. How did we leave? I don't think we
I don't
actually
remember
concluded
that far
on,
into the past.
on the
I thought we
retention.
that we have a retention report, and we'll be more articulate about that to be clear. And then the question is whether we need to come back and make an argument one way or the other of whether or not that would be a success indicator.
So TBD.
TBD.
On that.
I also want to say too that we'll need to reflect on all of this and make sure that we're focused on the plan. And part of the way the memo is framed is that we will have a suite of products that will be available that range from the achievement and accountability report to the specific milestones, and we have to pay attention to both. And so that and therein lies a little bit of tension. I think John puts it on the table that when it's what's reported is what is followed through on. And so but we started the presentation today with the data from the achievement and accountability report. So part of our commitment, my commitment, is to drive everything we do based on on the data that we have, and then to make all of those data in a usable fashion for the multiple purposes that we have as decision makers, as educators, as people in classrooms, as people running the system. So we'll use that as a framework to come back and hopefully be articulate about that.
Great.
I do have a couple of other questions about some of the strategy indicators and what we're collecting there. Under safe and supportive school climate, we have a percentage of students with one or more ODR for major infraction. Because this is something we have spent a lot of time talking about, can we break that down by race and gender? Or is that not, do we collect it that way? Is that?
Yes, I think we do. Yes, we do collect it that way. The reason for my hesitation is that right below it, we are already breaking out the average out-of-school suspension days per student.
I think that's I think that's useful, but I think it would also be useful to have it with ODRs and not just suspensions. Am I the only one?
No, I would agree with that actually, but
because we do have relatively, a small percentage of students being suspended, but I think we recognize that we have a general discipline gap, the disparity problem, that I think will be more effectively captured if we're breaking out the ODR information.
You would have to ensure, I think, if you start doing that, that ODRs are used consistently among the buildings. And right now, I know they're not. I mean, and even within a building, some teachers write them, some teachers don't.
Well, maybe this, maybe this can be part of the way we start to analyze that
and part
address
of
that problem.
I think your point makes the case for needing to break it out.
Yeah.
Does it?
Yeah, it
does. Well, but are we ready to get into that? Because that's...
I think we have to get into it. I think we've been talking about it for a couple of years, and we need to
Because ODRs are useful in many ways. Like let's say that you're tracking tardies to classes, okay? How many kids are tardy to classes? You're going to do some PBIS event. And so everybody's encouraged for 2 weeks to write ODRs when kids are late to class. To see who gets to participate.
These are major ODRs, right?
Right,
yeah, well,
major infractions.
I don't think
only for major infractions then.
Yes.
Well, that's what we're talking
Okay.
about.
All right.
Yeah.
Reporting here, so I think that would be.
Then I'm more comfortable. I thought you were talking about all ODRs.
No. I just.
Well, you served on the
expanding
working
on-
group. Sony, do you think, the only question I would have is that breakdown important to assessing the activities and the strategies that are being focused on in that area?
Oh, I think, yes.
And if the answer to that is yes, then we should, ask Joyce where she would weigh in on that and come back. There may be a specific reason why, it may have been entertained and then a specific reason, a very valid reason why it wasn't chosen, that's all. So I think we should defer to, unless Peter, you can represent it, defer to Joyce and then come back with potentially changing it. Just in other questions like this, they've come up with really valid reasons why they didn't include.
I think it's, in some ways it could be a leading, if we're doing it for suspension, to me it makes sense that we would be doing it for major ODRs.
Right, because you want to
I
track the
agree.
pipeline.
Yes.
And if we're already
that's what I was trying
collecting
to say,
it
was
that
a
way,
leading indicator.
it seems that we should be able to report that. And then my other just question, maybe on the family and community engagement piece. We have, different measures of parental involvement and outreach that are coming from the 5 Essential Survey. But my recollection from when we had our discussion of the 5 Essential reporting and with the gentleman from the University of Chicago talking about the reporting, is that information comes from teacher survey.
That's right.
Not. So do we have any, I guess we're not doing the parent surveys anymore. It seems to me, I know we have that information from 5 Essentials because I know parents do fill out the survey. Is there any way that we can get that information and have that be a part of this in a usable way without too much additional effort?
Yeah, so that's actually, I think if you look back at the last version of the first version that went out for public comment of this report, there were actually measures from the parent survey that were included, recommended in this area. I later took those out.
Okay.
And the reason for that is twofold. One is the quality of the survey instrument, and two is the size of the response rate and its representative nature for the Evanston community. So here we are this year, several weeks from the end of the parent survey. We've got 3 schools that have achieved the 20% response rate threshold. And I would anticipate maybe by the end of the survey window that maybe we could get to half of our schools. But again, that's still only 20% of the population, and generally it's the most engaged 20%. So I don't think that the survey itself is going to accurately capture the perspectives of our parents. The other piece to it is that there were some measures that I had recommended, and in talking to the folks at U of C, the survey itself isn't, those measures didn't hang together when they tried to take individual questions and make measures out of them. And a big part of that is that statewide in Illinois and with their different clients, getting a high response rate on a parent survey is pretty difficult, so they've not had the data to do that well. So that's the current state, but how do we deal with it? One of the things you'll see as a milestone in the strategic plan is to conduct some focus groups of folks who have historically been disengaged from or disengaged by the district. And depending on how those go, I think we could look at some focus group techniques to monitor our engagement from the family perspective going forward. And then we can also look at, as we get better at family and community engagement, have more channels of communications access to our families, whether there may be a way of introducing a survey that would have a higher and more representative response rate.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
As a quick sidebar, what you might pass on to our U of C colleagues is, I think our response rates, actually for parent surveys, which were much higher in the first years, and to some extent it's a self-fulfilling prophecy when you fill out a survey and then there's no publicly available data on the output of that survey. So I think in some ways parents are reacting to, very honestly, to the lack of why should I do this? The data was never made available. It's not part of the report card. And so by virtue of the way it's been approached, it's yielding a lower response. Wouldn't correct the representative sample, I don't believe, but in terms of the volume of response.
Yeah, just one general comment, because I really appreciate the feedback, and we'll go talk about it early in the morning tomorrow. I do want to go back to the earlier comment, Claudia, that you said about the plan being useful. The scorecards have to be useful as well, and I'm not saying that anything that you've suggested isn't, but just thinking about, we'll have to think about how we can do what is suggested and make sure that it's in a usable fashion so that it can drive the type of discussion, the type of debate at the school level, at the board level, at the administrative level. And so that will be part of how we come back.
Great. All right. So our next meeting is the joint meeting 65202, when we will talk about the calendar, the joint accountability report, the joint literacy goal. That should be it. And then we have our FYIs. Did anyone have any questions or comments on the FYIs?
I did. About the Lincoln Stormwater Project. Sounded like good news.
Yes.
And the qualifier was, unless we run into any glitches in the process with the city. My question is, what can we do to anticipate problems and work with the city so we don't hit any unexpected bumps? Or maybe that's already in process.
I can tell you the civil engineer who we're using is very familiar with the city of Evanston. They've done a lot of work for them. So the package that they're putting together certainly should be familiar to the city of Evanston, and they should be designing that with city of Evanston regulations and in mind, and they have to get that past the city and then the MWRD as well.
I guess so I'll frame the question slightly differently, because I appreciate that. I think, I was aware because they had talked a bit about that at the Finance Committee meeting. I mean, in case the city has changed anything, like, can we make sure that they have, you know, the current expectations of that process, that the city's provided that? So in case, like, the MWRD made a recent change in process and that's what caused the problem, can we make sure, or ask them to make sure that they are 100% confident going in that they're providing everything that the city needs?
I will ask the civil engineer to speak with the city.
That's what, yes, that's what I'm
Absolutely.
getting at.
I have one other question related to the storm project as well, and this is just a request maybe as part of the March 9th meeting. Because I did go back and look at the original estimate, which was $463,000 that went to 600 and something and then went to 773. And so I would like a little bit more detailed accounting of what the differences are in that increase over time and how we get to now 773,000 as the quote.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Thanks.
Even some of the Lincoln parents are quite surprised at that increase in the cost of it. So it would be helpful for them to know that as well.
Any other questions? And no informal presentations from the public? If there's no further business, I find this meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much.